I would like you to imagine for a moment your son or daughter being arrested for breaking the law and, after a trial, being put into prison for several years. Some of you may have already experienced this kind of misfortune, but I invite the rest of us to think about how we might react. Most families do not abandon their wayward sons or daughters, although quite a few prisoners are already estranged from their families before and while incarcerated. Still, would you visit your child regularly? Would you find ways to support him or her, knowing full well that he or she is truly guilty of the crime and is paying the debt to society? Would you feel some shame, especially when talking with your relatives or friends? Would you perhaps get to know some of the other prisoners that are in jail with your own child? Most of us do not know how we would react in such a situation. My hope is that the natural love in a family, despite all the hurt and betrayal, would surface to provide support and hope and the possibility of a future. And this is where I believe we Christians need to focus our attention, on our brothers and sisters who are in jail. Since we have one Father in heaven, we need to learn to see these men and women as the brothers and sisters of Jesus and therefore of us. Then Jesus' statement, "When I was in prison, you visited me," begins to make sense. Not because we know what to do when visiting a criminal, but because there are many other ways that we can help people in jail, and more especially after jail, to choose to lead successful and happy lives for the good of all of society. Let me suggest 3 ideas for us to consider in fulfilling this part of the parable of the sheep and goats. First, if somebody you know ends up in jail, do not abandon him or her. Perhaps a letter, or a visit, or some form of encouragement. My mother would send a box of homemade cookies to let them know that they are not forgotten. Too often, part of the punishment that comes from going to jail is being treated like a pariah by the rest of society, or indeed by one's own family and friends. We do not have to condone what they did. We simply let them know by our presence and support that we know that they can be and do better. And chances are excellent that a person coming out of prison with a sense of not being alone or singularly condemned for his or her actions will reintegrate into society as a productive member than one who comes out angry and vengeful for perceived slights, deserved or otherwise. Second, there are some superb organizations that can use your support. I am thinking of the John Howard Society and the Elizabeth Fry Society, both of which work toward the rehabilitation of those coming out of prison, as well as the just treatment of those in prison. Organizations such as these give me hope because they always look at the intrinsic goodness of human beings rather than stereotype them as criminals. Furthermore, they believe, and they prove this by their actions, that many convicted criminals can find a new and wholesome place in society where they will contribute with their work and their skills to the betterment of us all. And they will do this because they have been given a chance. I recall, for example, a man that I met years ago whom I will call Andre. Andre was very bitter, a very angry man in prison, and he couldn't wait to get out to do more damage. After years of counseling and support through the John Howard Society, he did come out of prison, but he came out with an education and a readiness to see the good in others and to be that way himself. I actually met Andre at a homeless shelter where he was helping to feed the men who came there. Nobody was more sympathetic and understanding to those down on their luck or tormented by mental illness. And so I come to my last point. Government policy plays a huge role in how prisoners are treated and whether or not they are offered any opportunities for rehabilitation. All of this costs money, but I believe that it is money well spent. However, if a government focuses our prison system on punishment rather than rehabilitation, on retribution, which is a form of vengeance, rather than restorative justice, then as a society we have failed to fulfill the command of Christ. And I remind you of what I said earlier about the parable of the sheep and the goats. It is the nations that the judge praises or condemns. So again, we need to take some responsibility to encourage our governments to put money into making better human beings, not bigger prisons. Caring for people in jails is not easy for most of us because it is very human to say that they have received what they deserve. But the heart of Christ reminds us that they are our brothers and sisters, deserving our care, not our judgment. And so I conclude with a statement from a Catholic lay prison chaplain who talked to me after a particularly trying day in his jail. There is so much good in these men, but if nobody convinces them of that, then they will continue to do what got them in prison in the first place.